world's greatest filmmakers and animators, Hayao Miyazaki.
When you're one of the world's most beloved filmmakers, somebody whose global prestige has only grown in the past 10 years since your semi-retirement, it's quite the tall order to suddenly put out a new film. Even more so when you've purposefully shrouded that film in mystery. Putting out a movie that your audience has no idea what to expect from. Yet that's exactly what Miyazaki Hayao, the famed co-founder of animation giant Studio Ghibli, just did today here in Japan. As it turns out, his new animated film, How Do You Live? Kimi-tachi wa Dou Ikiru Ka, may just be as mysterious as the marketing campaign, or lack thereof, that came before it. So I've actually only just left the theater after seeing How Do You Live? And I managed to make it to the second showing of the movie, actually, for the entire run at this theater. But the nature of this film, one that Ghibli really wants you to know as little as possible about before you go to see it, makes reviewing the movie a little iffy. I'll be discussing the plot in some minor detail, not really what would usually be considered spoilers, but enough that if you truly want to go in blind, just as Miyazaki and Suzuki of Ghibli kind of intend, you might want to avoid, so I will add spoiler tags when we get to that point. But if all you want to know is a bit about the vibe of How Do You Live, I have 3 words for you. Mysterious, gothic, and ephemeral. Now, all of these words could be used to describe aspects of previous Ghibli and Miyazaki fare. Well, except maybe gothic, which I think mostly only applies to certain parts of the most recent Ghibli theatrical film before this, When Marnie Was There, which was released in 2014. It's been a while. The bathhouse of Spirited Away, the dark plain beyond Howl's Magic Door, the ruins of mines and of ancient sentry robots in Castle in the Sky. However, one word that I would rarely use to describe Miyazaki films up until this point would be oppressive. How Do You Live is almost oppressive in how unstable the ground beneath our primary character's feet is. There's a profound feeling of a world in both spiritual and physical chaos. Everything we know feels ready to crumble at any moment. Of course, this does line up well with the title of the film, which takes its name from the title of a 1937 morality novel by author Yoshino Genzaburo. Now, does this movie, which I will say is not an adaptation, involve this book in any way? As has been both hinted and denied at various points, well, can't explain that without getting into any spoilers, I think. But it's clear watching this movie that Miyazaki has been pondering the meaning of that title. How do you live? How do we get along in this world of violence and unease? What do we leave for our descendants? How do we relate to our ancestors who've left us with this world? Miyazaki may well feel like he's nearing his leave-taking of this plane of existence, with the world around him seemingly just as on the edge of collapse as when he was a young boy during World War II. So what does he pass on to those he leaves behind? To discuss this any further, I need to go at least a little bit into minor plot description. I'm not going to go any more in depth than what you can already find on Wikipedia. In fact, I will be even less detailed, just a very basic description. Now, if you do not want to hear any description of the plot, feel free to skip ahead to this time code. It'll be most of the video, but there'll still be something for you to listen to towards the end as well. Konnichiwa everybody, and welcome back to Unseen Japan. As always, I'm Noah Oskow, and unlike always, instead of seeing a riot of YouTube bandwidth-destroying Sakura pedals, you're getting to look at my mug. This is about as exciting for you as it is for me. So, as you may know, this movie, How Do You Live, has essentially only one piece of of visuals available for the public, which means that unlike my usual kind of narration and, visuals, instead of that, I've gone ahead and decided for the first time ever to do a bit of a talking head sort of situation, instead of the whole talking disembodied voice. If you like this review, whether you're new to the channel or a longtime follower, consider giving us a like, subscribing, and maybe even lending some support over on Patreon. Alright, back to Kimi-tachi wa Dou Ikiru Ka. How do you live? So with all of the talk of this movie being a grand fantasy epic, I must say it's a little bit disorienting when the movie opens instead in World War II era Japan. This is the second Miyazaki movie in a row to use this setting, something that I imagine many people will immediately pick up on if they've recently watched The Wind Rises. An adolescent boy named Mahito leaves war-ravaged Tokyo for the countryside alongside his father. This echoes Miyazaki's own childhood. His father was an engineer who worked on airplanes, and the family moved to the countryside in Utsunomiya from Tokyo to find shelter during the worst of the war years. Much like his previous movie, The Wind Rises, Miyazaki is clearly reflecting on his own upbringing. Mahito, suffering through his own trauma, finds himself haunted by a blue stork inhabiting a nearby pond. A tower of mysterious origin within the local forests also beckons to him. When a reason to venture into this dark, uninviting building arises, he bravely enters the tower. A world beyond his imagining resides within. Now, you may have noticed that there are many echoes of other Miyazaki films in this description. Scenes and settings within the film also harken back to various Miyazaki staples. What sets How Do You Live apart, however, is its tone and pacing. The latter feels surprisingly languid, with the main action only really coming into play around maybe 45 minutes into the film. Now, there is good setup, and this setup is placed within settings and architecture that live up to Miyazaki's unique ability to craft spaces that are both nostalgic and otherworldly. In tone, the movie is almost gothic. I've never seen a Ghibli movie that feels so distant, almost dour. And indeed, I'd hazard that parts of this movie are even a little off-putting. I'm gonna go ahead and hazard that this might actually be the least accessible Miyazaki film. His penchant for the gross and the gooey, which we've seen before in his other films, is here unbound. So, however, is his flair for beauty both unearthly and of this world. Suzuki Toshio, Ghibli producer and constant hype man, has said that here, unrestrained by partner companies or desire for monetary return, Miyazaki was allowed to make a film just as he wanted to. What seems to result is a series of astounding set pieces and creatures, both silly and threatening. There are more ghostly plains, dreamy moss-covered buildings, and deep, unknowable recesses down darkened corridors than ever before. These images are indelibly Miyazaki. Imagine the sort of iconic, deeply affecting imagery that you'd see perhaps 4 or 5 times in your average Miyazaki movie, and multiply that by 10. Now, what perhaps let me down a little bit is that these images, more fantastical than ever, are tethered to a place that feels so unreal. The bird-populated, logic-defying space of the Netherworld is hard to get a grasp on. This, of course, seems purposeful. But for a first viewing, it leaves the viewer feeling unmoored. The late famed critic Roger Ebert, a huge Miyazaki backer during his time,
Our next movie is quite simply a masterpiece. It's Spirited Away, the amazing new animated feature by Hayao Miyazaki of Japan.
once said he felt the director had lost a bit of his magic with Howl's Moving Castle. Sophie, old or young, never quite seems to understand and inhabit this world. Unlike Kiki of the delivery service or Chihiro, the heroine of Spirited Away, she seems more witness than heroine. A parade of weird characters come on stage to do their turns, but the underlying plot grows murky and, amazingly for a Miyazaki film, we grow impatient at spectacle without meaning. Now, I like Howl a lot more than Ebert ever did, but I somewhat get his point. Spirited Away was an unknowable world of the gods, but it still felt like it had rules. The bathhouse had structure, both physical and societal. Now, if Ebert had problem with Howl's chaotic setting, I have to wonder about how he would feel about How Do You Live's infinitely more nebulous bird world. And now I have to admit to having had a bit of a hard time with this aspect of the film. I love how lived in, how real Miyazaki's worlds can feel. Whether Porco's Adriatic or Iron Town and Princess Mononoke, these settings live on in my heart. The lack of structure of anything knowable in the netherworld and How Do You Live left me a bit cold. As I ponder the film a bit more, however, the meaning of all this seems to come together a bit more. This will be a movie that I think really requires more than one viewing to properly process. However, with its slow pace and dreamy, perhaps even nightmarish unreality, it could be a hard sell for general audiences. The end section of the film, however, brings much of the processions together, finishing off the story in a strong way. As Hisaishi Joe's otherwise somewhat understated score begins to swell, I felt chills go down my spine. I was witnessing something truly beautiful and truly unique. Alright, end of spoilers pretty much. So here's the question. Will the audience be here for this quote-unquote final Miyazaki film? Now, the lead up to Kimi-tachi wa Dou Ikiru Ka, How Do You Live, it's been unlike anything we've ever seen before. It's impossible to imagine a major tentpole film from any studio releasing without numerous trailers, teasers, clips, and more, and yet Miyazaki's first movie in a decade has received no promotion save a single teaser poster. Suzuki Toshio came up with this policy himself because he felt that the modern movie industry gives too much away via its promotional campaigns. How much more exciting, he thought, to go into a film completely in the dark. Miyazaki himself found the idea appealing and gave it the green light. As the date of the premiere approached, however, he expressed some anxiety to Suzuki. Locally here in Japan, nearly every Ghibli film to this point has been the top Japan-originated box office draw in any given year of its release. Now, with an audience no longer trained to expect Ghibli films, can this incredibly unique strategy really work? So yesterday I visited a theater in Chofu here in Tokyo. It's a pretty big theater in an area of Tokyo that really prides itself on its connection to the movies, and there was not a single poster, not a single thing to even hint that this major summer movie, one of the most important movies to come out in Japan this year, or even the surrounding years, was coming out the following day. So I approached an employee at the theater and I asked, "Do you think that the audience here even knows that this movie is coming out?" He just said, "I really wish they'd do some advertising for this thing." The single visual anyone has to go off of is the teaser poster featuring a vague Birdman thing. Fans have been wondering for months what this image might represent. The answer is, interesting to say the least. Not sure I was really sold on what this thing is. It's a... You can judge for yourself what you feel about this aspect of the film. In the days leading up to the film's release, artists all over Japanese language Twitter have taken to the website to post pictures of how they imagined this figure might actually exist within the world of the film, or to do some sorts of light parody of the image. Although fans, observers, and perhaps even the director have wondered about Suzuki's strategic thinking, the truth is that the man has been a wizard of marketing for the past half-century. According to Steve Alpert, who worked closely with both Suzuki and Miyazaki for over 15 years. I learned some very important lessons about marketing films from seeing how Toshio Suzuki marketed Ghibli films in Japan. He is without a doubt one of the most brilliant people to ever market anything. And he does it by not following the conventional wisdom. This is not an easy thing to do when you're under pressure from all those around you who wanted to stick with what's easiest. Now, the theater that I saw the movie in was packed. Although it was a bit hard to gauge the audience's reaction around me. Japanese theaters, there's not a lot of laughing, there's not a lot of performative reactivity. Usually you can catch a little bit of someone's conversation when the film ends. It was pretty quiet. It was pretty quiet when the movie ended. Don't know if that's something to judge it on or not in this case. As I entered, the only sign of the movie's existence was a small marquee poster. All around were gigantic posters some tens of meters long advertising Pixar's Elemental and Mission Impossible. A small news crew was outside. They had the singular poster, the exact same poster that we've seen for months now, that they had bought as the only thing that you could purchase at the marquee, along a few slip covers that had the exact same image. This is literally the only thing that they're currently showing anyone, but unless you actually go into the theater yourself. Now, as I left, the crowds were actually surging, and some were even looking disappointed that they weren't able to buy tickets anymore, that, showings had sold out. We'll see if Suzuki's stratagem pays off. It may well. There's a part of me that is a little worried, and there's a part of me that thinks they don't really care. They basically used Ghibli funds for this entire thing. Making money was not really the goal here, I think. I think the goal was just to let Miyazaki do what he wanted to do and express it via hand-drawn, quote-unquote traditional animation, and that's something he certainly did. Now, personally, I feel like this no-promotion marketing strategy, in terms of its effect on viewers, it's both a blessing and a curse. It allowed all of the visuals, every single aspect about the story, everything you see on screen, exactly how any of it's going to play out. It was all a complete mystery, and it was all a surprise. This is something that you just don't get in the modern movie ecosystem. It was truly an incredible experience to go into a Ghibli film where you usually, if you're a fan like me at least, you spend a lot of time listening to the soundtrack beforehand, listening to the title theme song, looking over the trailers, thinking about what is going to be in this movie, getting a feel of what it's going to be like, which in of itself is a lot of fun. But this is quite different to just go in completely blind. And I think there is a real value in a surprise, and it was a very unique experience. Impossible to have this sort of unadulterated experience like this. But I also feel as though the very limited information that we've had up until this point kind of left some people who have been following the idea of what this movie might be, to kind of fill in those gaps by themselves. And the way that we probably filled in these gaps was with the movie that we personally were kind of hoping that it might be. Now, with no solid expectations, it turned out to be something very different from what I kind of personally might have hoped for it to be. On first viewing, this does miss some of the solid storytelling, world building, and emotional highs that I personally love from Ghibli films. On the other hand, as the images and deeper, more nebulous themes have time to sink in, I'm already finding myself appreciating them a little bit more than I did as I was watching the film itself. It's really helping me appreciate what makes How Do You Live so unique in the Ghibli catalog. Now, it's been suggested that Miyazaki made How Do You Live with his grandson in mind, much as he made Spirited Away for a friend's young daughter or Ponyo for very young children in general. It's clear that this film does hearken to its moralistic namesake. Our protagonist is unhaltingly brave and steadfast. While he's not inhumanly competent, he is very competent, and he probably demonstrates the way that Miyazaki might say a young man should be in our current world. A world that's falling apart, and that you have the duty to remake. A duty that you may choose to embrace in your own personal way. How Do You Live is Miyazaki's personal film through and through. Despite the outstanding production values, it might as well be an indie film. It seems to have no desire to be a breakout hit or to really appeal to the masses. What it does have, however, is a deeper message for an unknown world, and the young people who will have to live within it. If this is indeed Miyazaki's final film, which chances are high, I can only thank him for that message, and for his many decades of creating some of the best animated fare in the entire world. Alright Mina, thanks for watching this one. Really wanted to get out a video review while so much of the world is unaware of when this movie will even be reaching their shores. Seeing it today was a real pleasure, as was telling you about it. Of course, there's a huge amount of content I can't really go into without more spoilers. I'm interested to see how others feel about the film though. I'm already set to see it again next week, after which I'll have some more thoughts to express alongside a project featuring every, and I do mean every, Ghibli film. It's been great to get more videos out on the channel recently, and if you appreciate what I'm doing here at the channel, Patreon is the main source for funding for all UJ activities, and that includes the entire budget for Unseen Japan, the YouTube channel. Your support would mean the world to me, to the entire team, and I'm quite serious about that. Alright, it's time to clock out and dream of birdly netherworlds. Mata ne. It's impossible to imagine major tent porn. Tent porn.